Hey, how are you today? Welcome to Get Ready with Me and Talk About Stuff. I am Stephanie McCown, your host, your makeup artist who does not do tutorials, etc. and so forth. Welcome. I don't have a particular topic that I want to talk about today. I've got a couple things on my mind. First thing I want to address though, someone left a comment on my video from earlier this week and asked me why I put my makeup on before I start my video. I don't. And as you can see, the only thing I have on my face right now is moisturizer. I'm confused by the comment because I don't know if it's an insult or attempted an insult anyway. I don't know. It's very confusing. But anyway, no, I do not put any makeup on before I start my video. What you see is what you get. So anyway, welcome. The stuff that I'm going to talk about today, I try very hard to keep the topics I discuss, very light and positive. But sometimes some things need to be discussed that are perhaps less than that, or other than that. Not less than, just other than. And that is kind of what we're looking at today. So the first thing I want to discuss was actually inspired by some events happening in my local community. And I think it's important to talk about these things. Now, I'm going to be talking in general terms, okay? So if you're somebody from my local community who chooses to out yourself in my comments, that's on you, and I will take no responsibility for that whatsoever. Because what I'm discussing, or about to discuss, is something that happens in communities all across the country. It's certainly not unique to our community, and it's certainly nothing that other people in other communities, haven't done, for better or for worse. So if you are local and you watch this and you choose to take offense and go off in my comments, have at it, but that's entirely on you. So this thing that this all started on New Year's Eve. Actually, it started a couple days ago. Or was it yesterday? I don't remember. All the days kind of run together. Anyway, so word went out that schools here would be going online for the next 2 weeks due to a large number of kids needing to be quarantined after COVID exposure over the holidays. Which isn't surprising. Anybody who's been paying attention knows that was a very likely scenario. By the way, there's nothing wrong with your picture. I'm just using a different way of recording today to make the background look like a 1980s VHS video. Your picture is fine. Anyway, so I think anybody who's been paying attention knew that there was a likely outcome of schools being closed for a time after the holidays, because even though, people were strongly advised not to travel and not to have large gatherings and so forth, we all knew, meaning anybody in this whole entire country who's paying attention, we all knew the likelihood of people actually abiding by that was slim to none. Okay, so it's not a surprise that people did this. What ended up coming out, though, in our small community was that there were people who gathered over the holidays for large New Year's Eve parties, and there were positive COVID. There was basically an outbreak caused, at least in part, by that. Now, I'm not saying that nobody else has ever, nobody else did that. I'm not saying it was entirely unexpected that something like this would happen. Like I said, anybody who's been paying any attention at all knows that something like this was going to happen. What I will say, though, because at least in my local community, once names started being circulated, and we live in a small town, that was bound to happen. Some of the people who participated in the party and did so because they were tired of the restrictions and they'd had enough and blah, 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 whatever excuse you want to throw in there, really were bothered that they got some clapback for that. here's the thing. This pandemic that we are all going through is only going to be contained if everyone does their part. And the irony in all of this is most of the time, the people complaining that the pandemic restrictions never end and they want to control our lives and blah, 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 the ones complaining about that are coincidentally also the ones who refuse to adhere to the guidelines, thereby ensuring that these restrictions will have to be extended. Because by not adhering to the guidelines, they are contributing to higher COVID numbers, thereby making it more necessary to put guidelines in place and keep them there for even longer. And this has been the problem since the beginning. We are almost a year into this, okay? And a year into this, or nearly a year into this, there is no excuse at this point for just deciding that you're tired of following guidelines, so you're just not going to do it. And then being surprised when, number one, your community seems to have a problem with that. And secondly, when word comes down from the powers that be that restrictions have to be elevated and extended. It's ridiculous at this point that anybody would be surprised that after enough people have decided they don't need to follow the restrictions, that, okay, well, then heavier restrictions are going to be put in place. And by the way, this is all going to be going on a lot longer than we anticipated. You know, people, typically it's the people who don't want to follow the guidelines who like to bring up, well, when this first started, we were told this was going to be 2 weeks. Here it is a year later. Yeah, you know why? It's because people decided they didn't want to follow the rules, and they decided to take it upon themselves to be the experts and not do what was recommended to contain the virus. So yeah, almost a year later, here we are. And I get angry about it for so many reasons. I get angry because it is incredibly arrogant for anyone in any community anywhere to decide that their entertainment and their fun is more important than the health and safety of their community. And whether you know, people who do these things always say, well, nobody was forced to go to the party. No, of course not. They chose to go. But what they did as well was they made a choice for every person they come in contact after they leave, or they come in contact with after they leave that party. So if they went to a party and they were exposed to COVID, everyone that they come in contact with after they left that party was also exposed to COVID. That means that people who are doing their part and following restrictions and staying home and foregoing gatherings with family and friends over the holidays, those people that come in contact with those who decided they didn't need to follow the guidelines are put at risk, even though they have done their part, even though they have followed the restrictions and done everything that was recommended to try to stay safe. You don't get to make that decision for your whole community. You don't get to decide that your fun is more important than the safety of your community and then have a problem with it when your community says, no, it actually isn't more important and I have a problem with what you did. That's the reality of it. And and it's not just, again, it's not just happening here in my small town. This is happening all over the place, all over the country. We hear, there are stories about families and groups of friends who just decided, we don't want to follow the guidelines anymore. We're sick of it. We're tired of it. So we're not going to do it. We're done. Okay, well, that's great. If there was a way for you to be done with it and just keep the contagion entirely amongst yourselves, fine, have at it. But that's not what happens. And a lot of the times, the people who end up getting infected are people who made the conscious choice to avoid the very situations you chose to put yourself in. And they had no control over what you did, but you decided your fun was more important and you ended up bringing the virus to them. And that is why people are angry. Nobody's angry that somebody wanted to have fun. Nobody is saying these guidelines are not tough to follow. I don't hear anybody saying that. What I am hearing is stories about people who had loved ones that had to go to the hospital by ambulance, and they had to ride alone. I'm hearing stories from friends whose loved ones died in the hospital alone because COVID restrictions kept family and friends from visiting them in their last days. I'm hearing stories from people who are sitting through chemo treatments alone for hours because COVID restrictions prevent them from having a friend or family member come hang out with them. People are dying alone because of COVID, and it takes an incredible amount of self-importance to think that your fun is more important than preventing this from continuing any longer than it has to. It takes a lot of arrogance to decide that your sacrifice of a party is bigger than the sacrifice other families have made of sending their loved one off to the hospital alone in an ambulance to die alone in a hospital room because COVID meant they were not allowed to be in there with them. I mean, again, anybody, anywhere who is doing that, get over yourself. Grow up. Understand that these restrictions are difficult for everyone, not just you. And also understand that every time you do something like this and further restrictions have to be put in place, the very things you're complaining about, this hill you're willing to die on, only gets bigger. So students came back, here in my town anyway, they came back from break expecting to resume school as usual, only to learn that no, because of other people's carelessness and selfishness, they have to go back to virtual schooling for at least the next 2 weeks. And we all know that a lot can happen in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, because of the holidays and because of people's carelessness, there could be a spike in cases, meaning that the virtual schooling is going to be extended. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, party goers. There are a lot of kids who are not doing too well with having to do virtual school. Virtual school is difficult for a lot of kids. It's been affecting their mental health in major ways. It's something that they are having a hard time keeping up with because they need the motivation that comes from being in a classroom and being with their peers and having their teacher there. And every time you do something like this, you're affecting the mental health of these kids, because these kids are just looking for some kind of stability, some kind of normal. And you're taking that away from them when you decide that your party is more important than community safety. And because of your party and the parties other people had and other gatherings people had, it's not just one person or one family doing this. There are lots of people doing it. Because of the choices people made regarding the kind of fun they absolutely had to have over the holidays, these kids who are already struggling are going to just struggle more. And to decide that your fun, your comfort, your family traditions were more important than guarding the mental health of the kids who are struggling through this is supremely arrogant and selfish. It also does not escape my notice that a lot of the people who are so loudly and proudly disregarding the guidelines because they've, quote, had enough, or they're sick of it, or they don't believe that the coronavirus is that bad. It's got a 99% survival rate. You know what COVID also has? It also has a lot of long-term effects on people that can be worse than death. Death is not the only outcome to be considering here. There are people who have had long-term breathing difficulties months after having COVID-19. There are people who never had an issue with energy before, and 6 months, a year, nearly a year after having COVID-19, they're still struggling with extreme fatigue because they never fully recovered from this virus that you say is only a cold or a flu. There are people who never had an issue with blood pressure and now can't keep their blood pressure down because COVID-19 did something to their body and changed the way their body regulates its blood pressure. There are more things to worry about than death. And for you to once again say your fun and your comfort was more important than protecting people in your community from something that can give them long-term health issues. I mean, is it really that hard to understand why people would be angry that you did that you took it upon yourself to make that decision for your whole community, that you were more important than everyone else that you will come in contact with after your party? Is it really that mind-boggling? I also haven't missed the fact that a lot of the people who do this here in my town and across the country are people who are very proudly pro-life. I would love for you to explain to me how it's pro-life to make decisions for your entire community that will put many people in your community at risk of contracting a virus that for some will be fatal. It's not a question of if, it is when and who. It's not like we don't know death is a possibility. Furthermore, knowing that there are other long-term health outcomes with this virus that can be, to put it lightly, less than pleasant, I don't see much pro-life about that. Now, if you have paid any attention to me at all in these videos or on Facebook or on Twitter, you know that I've had issues with the pro-life movement, if you will, for a very long time. This is nothing new. It is nothing new to me that people who say they are pro-life don't value life beyond the fetus. They worship at the altar of the perpetual fetus, and everybody else, I guess, screw them. That is the message I get when people who say they are pro-life decide, again, for an entire community, that the risk posed to everyone else by their need to attend a party and, more likely than not follow any of the guidelines to contain the virus. No social distancing, no masks, probably a lot of good laughs had over the fact that, oh, we're getting away with something, we were told not to do this, and here we are doing it. That is a decision you made for the entire community. And some members of this community will die because of that decision. That does not strike me as pro-life in the least. In fact, it strikes me as selfish. It strikes me as hypocritical. It strikes me as arrogant. And it really exposes, for me, well, not exposes, reinforces for me the idea that a lot of pro-life Christians have a very relative set of moral values. And their commitment to those values they say they hold dear is directly related to convenience and comfort. Because as soon as adhering to those values costs them the convenience and comfort that they hold so dear, all of a sudden, protecting life, I don't know, maybe it's not that important. I don't think that people realize how much they are telling on themselves when they do things like this. I don't think people realize that it is not escaping anyone's notice that these values are apparently relative to them. That they have a way of being able to twist and turn the narrative regarding valuing life and so forth to suit their needs for the moment, and people notice. You can hear this and get angry about what I'm saying, and I'm sure some people will. Or, you can hear this and hear that this is how pro-life Christians who disregard the COVID guidelines are being perceived by people who are on the outside looking in. And I have to also say that as someone who was once part of that culture, I was an evangelical at one point. I lived and breathed it most of my life. I get it. You know, it's very easy to think that you're right because you have a lot of people who have a vested interest in making you think you're right because they want your money. They want you to feel like you're part of a community, so you'll keep coming back. It's very seductive to present this white evangelical version of the gospel as the only one that matters because, whether you want to admit it or not, there are a lot of people who have an interest in convincing you that that's correct, in convincing you that what people are telling you, what people are trying to help you understand about the way you're presenting this gospel, you know, it's easy to convince you that that what I'm saying and what so many others are saying is not relevant because we don't believe as you do, so we can't possibly understand. That's a very seductive way to think about the gospel you're presenting. But the reality of it is, you know, if you're sincerely trying to share Jesus with people, you better be listening to how they're receiving it. And when I see people who claim to be followers of Christ doing things that are not loving toward their neighbor, that are not looking out for the least of these, that are not taking care of the sick, what do you think that makes me think of your Jesus? Now, fortunately, I actually have high regard for Jesus. It's his followers that I have an issue with. Gandhi said, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. They are so unlike your Christ." And I heard that years ago when I was very early in my deconstruction. And wow, did that hit home. I thought to myself, regardless of what I think I'm presenting or what the church thinks it's presenting, if this is how people feel about the Jesus we're presenting to them, that is entirely on us. It is not on them. It means that we're missing something with our message. Now, in the years since, I've walked away from the evangelical church entirely, but I still hold Jesus in high regard. I don't think he was a deity, but I do think that he has a lot to say about how to be a good human being, and I'm pretty sure that putting my entire community at risk because I wanted to go to a party is not part of that. So again, if you're somebody who's watching this and you're going to get offended by what I'm saying about how your allegedly pro-life Christian witness is affected by your choice to put your entire community at risk so you can have some fun, you need to think long and hard about what you're really offended by, because I don't think it's me. And I don't think it's that people in your community are telling you that you messed up. I think that there is a lot of offense when people are held accountable for bad choices. I think in my long experience as an evangelical Christian, I've seen time and time again where people aren't the least bit sorry they did something, but they are terribly sorry they got caught. And I think that if you really want to double down on your evangelical Christian witness, I'm going to go ahead and say that what you're feeling is what you all might refer to as the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Do not blame me and others for what you're feeling when people clap back at you for your bad decision, for your selfish decision. The reason you feel the way you do isn't because you're being victimized. It's because you made a choice for the entire community, and that choice caught up with you, as things do. And now you've got to reckon with it. And again, I'm speaking in general terms. Yeah, I'm speaking about a situation that's happening in my community. But again, this is happening all over the country. I promise you, there are other communities right now that are having the same conversation about people in their communities who made a decision for everyone else in deciding that their party was more important than the safety of their community. I promise you that's happening elsewhere, not just here. So if you're hearing this and you're from my area and you're tempted to think I'm talking entirely about you, I'm not. Again, get over yourself and understand choices have consequences, and you made a choice to put your comfort and entertainment ahead of your community, and surprise, surprise, your community is not happy you did that. All right, I'm having some trouble with my eye makeup. I'm gonna fix it up and be right back with some final thoughts. All right, I'm back. I decided not to do any fake lashes today because I just don't have the patience for it. But my final thoughts on what's happening in my own community and elsewhere across the country, no doubt. You know, you don't get to do things like this and then get offended when people are angry that you did something like that. You do not get to make a decision for your entire community because you want to have fun and then act surprised when your community is not too happy you did that. We are in the middle of a pandemic. People are sacrificing a lot of things to try to get through this. You know, I get it. Not having the get-togethers and so forth that we're accustomed to having is hard. But it's not just hard for you. It's hard for everybody. And the only way we're going to get through this is if everyone does their part. It's just very hard for me to feel sympathy for anyone who decides that the guidelines don't apply to them and then they get piled on because of it. It's hard for me to feel sympathy when we're closing in on 400,000 people dead from this virus. And to decide that, oh, well, I want to have a party, I want to travel, I want to do this and that. It's just selfish and it's arrogant, and I cannot wrap my mind around why that is so hard for people to comprehend. People are rightly upset when they hear that there are people within their community or their family or wherever that have decided they're not going to follow the guidelines, and if that puts other people at risk, then so be it. You can't expect people to be okay with that. And it should not surprise you that people aren't okay with that. You know, we have lived 4 years under a president who decided that the only right way is his way. And he told a lot of his supporters the only right way is his way. And they believed him. And they also adopted the idea that, as long as they think what they're doing is right, that's all that matters. And that was demonstrated clearly in the insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C. just a couple days ago, resulting in now 5 people dead. None of this is okay, and none of this is excusable in any way. And, there will be a reckoning. People are not going to continue making space for, people to just arrogantly think that what they're doing only affects them and it has no bearing on the larger community. It does. And people are tired of being put at risk because of one group of people's arrogance. So, we all want to get through this. And I do think that after President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are finally in office, and that day cannot come fast enough, I do think we're going to be on the path toward a much more effective handling of this pandemic. And guess what? That might mean there are more guidelines put in place that you're going to have to follow. Suck it up, Buttercup. Deal with it. If this had been handled right from the beginning, we would not be in the situation where it is, or in the situation we're in. And that's not entirely Donald Trump's fault. It's also your fault if you're one of the people who decided you just didn't want to wear a mask, or you didn't want to stay home, you wanted to go out and be with your friends, or you didn't want to practice social distancing, or any number of other things that you decided you just simply weren't going to do because my freedoms. This is on you as much as it is on him. You are contributing to the restrictions lasting longer. You are contributing to businesses being shut down because they can't afford to hold on to their business in the middle of a pandemic. That is on you. You can blame me and you can blame other liberals, other Democrats, all you want. But the reality is, had this been handled right from the beginning, we would be past this. Other countries managed it. But in America, we decided that our individual freedoms were more important than protecting the community. And now, almost a year later, here we are, worse off than we were when the pandemic was at its height last spring. Suck it up and deal with the fact that you are responsible. I have no sympathy at all for people who've taken it upon themselves to make decisions for their whole community's health and safety. And then they feel offended and hurt and whatnot when their community holds them accountable for it. If you really care about your community staying afloat, businesses not having to close down, kids getting back to school, to face-to-face learning safely, if you care about all of that and all of the things that you say you care about and use as a justification for not following the guidelines, if you really care, you need to do the exact opposite of what you're doing and follow the guidelines so we can get past this. It doesn't matter that there's a vaccine now. The vaccine is not going to be effective if people don't do what they have to do until enough people have been vaccinated that this is no longer a worry. And guess what? We are a long way away from that. I have said from the beginning that anti-maskers and people who just generally don't follow the guidelines, there is a racist element to it. There is a classist element to it. There is a clannish element to it, and I don't mean like KKK clan, although what I mean is thinking your group is the one group to whom there is an exception to the guidelines and the rules and so forth. And it has been not the least bit surprising to watch how all of this has unfolded, but it is nonetheless disheartening. And as someone who does value the Jesus you say you value, and I am pointing my finger at white evangelical Christians because they are largely responsible for how everything in this country has unfolded the last 4 years, and this pandemic is no exception. I actually value the Jesus you say you serve. And it is astonishing to me, but somehow still not surprising, that you are willing to disregard so many things that Jesus said and still say you're one of his followers, as you put lives at risk because you had this one thing you just absolutely had to do, damn the consequences. Live this faith you say means so much to you. And by the way, I don't care that it was white evangelical Christians that helped me so much in the past when my son was born and I needed diapers and so forth because I wasn't getting child support. That does not create an obligation on my part to never call out the bullshit when I see it. And boy, have I been seeing it the last 4 years, and especially during this pandemic. The whole world is calling your bluff. So you can be angry and feel sorry for yourself and feel like the victim because you're being held accountable for what you did. And again, this is a general statement, and if you choose to out yourself in comments, that is entirely on you. You can be mad and angry and feel sorry for yourself, or you can hear what people are saying to you about the shitty witness that you've been and understand choices have consequences, and you made a bad choice. You've been making bad choices. In 2016, you made a cataclysmic bad choice that ripped off the proverbial mask from your face and showed the whole world how much your Jesus means to you. And nobody has forgotten that. and it has followed you to today. And if you want to change the narrative, don't ask people to be okay with how you're representing your faith and how you're choosing things for your entire community. Don't ask people to be okay with that. Instead, look at yourself and look at the choices you're making and the witness you're presenting. The witness you say means so much to you. And understand, maybe you're doing it wrong, and maybe you need to take some ownership for your decisions and accept that you made a bad choice, and choices have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are an entire community telling you you messed up. I'm not going to apologize for being angry. I have presented myself in a respectful way, as respectful as I can be, and understand I am only one of literally millions and millions of people who have made these observations through this pandemic and over the last several years. For some people who've watched the white evangelical church for decades, they've been saying all these things for a very long time. Consider Occam's razor. Either everyone is misinterpreting your actions to an extraordinary extent, or more likely, you made a bad choice and represented your faith badly and dragged the name of Jesus through the mud in doing so. And it's time to be accountable for that. I don't even know what to say anymore to people. So I'm just telling you how I see it. And how I see it is, honestly, it doesn't look like your faith means a whole lot to you if you're willing to cast aside the teaching of Christ that tells you to be mindful of the least of these, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want people knowingly exposing you to potentially deadly contagion if they could help it. It just boggles my mind how people can cast aside teachings of someone they say is so dear to them just because it's more convenient and more fun to do what you want. Again, it is a very strange thing because none of it is a surprise. I've known this about the white evangelical church for years. I came out of that culture. I know how relative their morality is and how hypocritical they are and how easily they turn a blind eye. I am fully aware and have been for a very long time. Still, it is nonetheless disheartening when I see it up close and personal, unfolding in front of my eyes every single day, hurting people I care about in very real, tangible, measurable ways. And yet people will still dig in their heels and say that their rights trump even their faith, even what is expected of them because of their faith. So I feel no obligation to keep quiet about that. I feel no obligation to speak kindly about people who do these things. Now, I'm not going to go around trashing people, but if I'm asked a direct question, what do I think of this? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to answer honestly. And you don't get to silence me by bringing up things that have happened in the past. You know what? As a non-believer, I've helped lots of families too. I've given people money for diapers, for food. I've given families Christmas gifts. I've done a lot of things over the years that in no way creates an obligation on anyone's part to keep quiet if I'm doing something that could potentially harm my entire community. In fact, I would be disappointed if I did something like that and nobody called me out on it. Because eventually I would realize what I did and I would think, why didn't someone tell me? So if you're watching this and your community is letting you know what they think of your choice to celebrate over the holidays in a way that put people at risk, be grateful your community cares enough about you to tell you, because nobody had to. It's better to know the truth and have it said to you than it is to have people hiding the truth from you because they don't care enough about you to be honest. So there are multiple ways, anybody hearing this who feels me pointing the finger at them, there are multiple ways you can interpret what is happening. I encourage you to interpret it in the best possible way, to understand that people are justifiably angry, to understand that the people who are honestly giving you an opinion about it are doing it because they respect you enough to be honest with you, and that's a good thing. And the thing to do is to own your mistake, apologize for it, and do better going forward. And stop doing things that put your whole community at risk. Don't make that decision for everyone else. You don't have that right. You do not have that right. And to think that you do says so much more about you than it does about anyone who you feel is attacking you. Have a great day. I will talk with you again soon.